what you find again and again in the discussions around this whole idea that Donald Trump has a plan on Ukraine is that actually he doesn't. It's Wizard of Oz pulled back the curtain and there's nothing really there.
Donald Trump doesn't always follow through. And I think that Vladimir Putin does always follow through. He knows exactly what he wants.
There was Donald Trump saying all sorts of gushing things about Keir Starmer. It was a great big loving.
How does the government convert this very warm kind of milquetoast of an atmosphere into actual currency on the world stage? And could it all fall apart? Welcome to this special edition of the Fourcast in Washington, D.C., in front of the White House, where the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has just met the President, Donald Trump. I think they had about an hour and a half in the Oval Office. And the most extraordinary thing about this meeting was what was said afterwards in the press conference. Now, we often wonder whether a British Prime Minister, under duress from an American president, might have a so-called Love Actually moment from the famous Richard Curtis movie, where the Prime Minister stands up and reminds the American president of all the values and principles that make modern Britain. Well, what we got today wasn't Love Actually, it was actually love between Starmer and Trump. How on earth did that happen? What does it mean for the relationship between London and Washington? What does it mean, crucially, for the visit of President Zelenskyy, which is also imminent, and of course, war and peace in Ukraine? With me here to discuss this, fresh from the Oval Office and the press briefing, Gary Gibbon, our political editor, and here on the roof, Lindsey Hilsum, our international editor. Gary, you're in a bit of a hurry, so let me start with you. How surprised were you by the kind of vibes in that press conference?
Yeah, they're not exactly twins separated at birth, are they, Keir Starmer and Donald Trump? There was no guarantee of chemistry. There was a lot of nervousness in Whitehall before this meeting, although Keir Starmer himself said, I've got a wonderful relationship with Donald Trump. I'm not sure any of us believed that Donald Trump would remotely actually like the company of Keir Starmer. We hadn't seen the two in public together. There was a private meeting when Donald Trump was a candidate for the presidency. Today we saw the two together, and it really did surprise you, because in the press conference that just finished, there was Donald Trump saying all sorts of gushing things about Keir Starmer. He said, the guy's a fantastic negotiator, blows his socks off, whatever you pay him back in Britain, you should pay him more. He may well, Donald Trump implied, Keir Starmer may well have stopped Britain being subject to tariffs. And it was a great big love-in, as you suggested, and it had been preceded by the moment in the Oval Office when Keir Starmer, like some sort of royal equerry from the Tudor period, say, I bear a message from the King, and handed him this letter, which silently Donald Trump then read in front of everybody, inviting him for a state visit. Someone said that was a bit like giving a nice new rattle to a very badly behaved baby. He looked absolutely ecstatically delighted with it. They brought it up again and again in this press conference. So the optics have been good. But on the way out just now, one of the British officials said to me, I bet you've never seen anything like that before. And I scratched my head and I thought, do you know what? I think I did see something a little bit like that before when Theresa May came here in 2017 and met Donald Trump in his first presidency. And I remember the Theresa May gang walking away. They hadn't had quite that sort of gushing love-in remarks, but they got some of the stuff they wanted out of Donald Trump said on camera. And then, you know, lo and behold, they were on the plane, as it happens, to Turkey for their next trip, and Donald Trump announced a ban on Muslims, which they didn't feel they'd been entirely kept in touch with in that meeting, although there's a suggestion that they should have been listening more carefully. But anyway, things can suddenly ambush you. Donald Trump saying, I won't need to put tariffs on you because it looks like we're going to have a great trade agreement very quickly. Well, trade agreements aren't very quick. And then we come back, as we're going to discuss, I'm sure, to the matter of Ukraine and what's really resolved there. Not much, I suspect.
Well, I wonder how long this warm glow of newfound friendship will last, because there was no detail I could discern on the actual security guarantees for troops on the ground in Ukraine. And of course, there was very little detail about any trade deals. And he did hint, that maybe Britain would be exempt from any tariffs. But I have to say, I wouldn't take any of that to the bank and try and cash it in.
No, and when it came to the backstop, the assurance that Britain is looking for, that if British forces go and work on this buffer zone between Ukraine and Russian-occupied Ukraine, that they can call on, as one official put it to me, the American cavalry, air support and all sorts of other things that only America can really supply. And what Keir Starmer said when he was asked, have you got assurances on the backstop? Our teams are going to talk about that. Well, I bet they are, because what you find again and again in the discussions around this whole idea that Donald Trump has a plan on Ukraine is that actually he doesn't. It's Wizard of Oz pulled back the curtain and there's nothing really there. There's an impatient president, lots of people rushing around trying to say and do things, but actually nothing that you could really call a plan.
Now, Gary, I know that you're in a massive hurry. You might be yanked away from us at any minute to get back on the school bus to Andrews Air Force Base and fly back to London. But if you can hold on for a few minutes and holler if you can't, I just want to bring in Lindsey.
It's something about that Britishness, I think, which obviously seems to impress President Trump.
Yeah.
And so, and that I think the Prime Minister played on very well. But the other thing which was very interesting, as you suggest, so, last week he called President Zelenskyy a dictator. He was asked this morning, do you still think he's a dictator? He says, did I say that? He couldn't remember. And then he said in the press conference that he had a lot of respect for President Zelenskyy.
And the bravery of their men?
Yes, he talked about how the Ukrainians had fought very bravely against the Russians. So you got a sense then, I suppose, that the British and the French, maybe before them, have actually had some impact, or is it just that he repeats what the last person he's spoken to said? And is Vladimir Putin going to be on the phone to him quick as a flash saying, it's not like that.
Yeah.
Believe what I say. What I say is very different.
Gary, I mean, President Trump famously believes what the last person in the room told him, and the last person in the room today was Keir Starmer. How does Britain, how does the government convert this very warm kind of milquetoast of an atmosphere into actual currency on the world stage? I'm sure they'll be popping the champagne corks at the embassy residence tonight, but how does it actually work from now? And could it all fall apart?
Yes, and it works with incredible difficulty. We are dealing with one of the most extraordinary elected leaders the world has ever seen. He just happens to be the leader of the most powerful, richest nation in the world, and the world that used to give a security guarantee to our country and a large chunk of Europe as well. And he says he doesn't want to do all sorts of things that America has done before. And I think you might be able to see any moment, perhaps, I'll move to one side, Keir Starmer leaving this, what I'm no doubt sure he will think is a very successful, maybe he's not quite leaving yet, maybe the love-in continues. And they've moved to the sofa. But it's going to be incredibly difficult to convert this into realities, because that's the nature of this beast, Donald Trump. And that, all this little moment shouldn't distract from that. He is an incredibly difficult man to predict. He doesn't necessarily stick to what he's just said, but what he fundamentally thinks is radically different from anything we've had from America before.
And Gary, it was interesting, wasn't it? Because in the last week, we've heard from the new German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, that Europe has to wean itself off American security. Macron has been pretty critical about Trump as well in the past. And there was this speculation amongst us that actually the combination of Trump's capriciousness and geography will move Britain closer and closer to the EU under the umbrella of security, perhaps. And listening to Starmer today, it didn't really sound like that, I have to say.
No, we've had a few moments recently where... oh, there's the president.
Can you have a chat with him? Throw him a question. Come on, Gary.
He doesn't... No, he's gone back in. He doesn't normally... we were asking before, does he come out? And people said, well, he's just a rule unto himself. Presidents don't normally do that, but this guy just doesn't play by the rules at all. Back to your point about Europe, though, we've heard a few times now Keir Starmer talking about how when we thought he would dance towards Europe more, he's actually pulled away from Europe a bit. But he was talking about it on AI regulation a few weeks ago and said actually he was actually quite chuffed about the opportunities of Brexit. Yes, Keir Starmer was saying this, the man who wanted a second referendum after the first one. And he's done it a few times, but at the same time, there is going to be a bit of cozying up to Europe on some things, or an attempt to do that. And very interestingly, when Donald Trump was asked about that in the earlier moment in the Oval Office, he didn't seem to say that would preclude, if Keir Starmer went down that route, that would preclude a close relationship with the United States. So I think they'll take, again, that as a win, but my goodness, can you really bank these things?
One of the things which I find so interesting is the way diplomacy has been turned upside down and we've gone through the looking glass. What normally happens with a meeting between world leaders is that the civil servants, the Sherpas, the diplomats, they organise everything in advance. They are the ones who have the long and complex negotiations. And then the principals come up at the end, they dot the I's, they cross the T's, they do the big signature, but it's all planned in advance. Now, the way President Trump does it is exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
So now the British civil servants, the Foreign Office officials who were on the trip, they're going to be going back and saying, well, how can we make any of this real? How can we make any of it stick? How can we make any of it actually translate into action? I don't know whether they can.
And maybe the whole point was that there was a complete absence of detail about the kind of security guarantees that the Americans might be offering that the Brits were certainly hoping for. I mean, they may have discussed them in private, we don't know. But in the absence of those guarantees, the question remains, is the offer of the British troops to Ukraine a trap that the Brits might fall into?
Well, but also, we are so far ahead of ourselves. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, has been very clear this week. We will not accept any NATO troops, British, French, whatever, as part of a peacekeeping force if there is any kind of peace deal over Ukraine. He's completely clear about that. There is no way that Vladimir Putin is going to accept that. So it could be that the British are offering something in order to give something to the Americans, as well as the increase in defense expenditure, but safe in the knowledge that this is very, very unlikely to fly. And one thing that Donald Trump did say today is, look, we are a bit far away from it. We haven't got a deal yet. That's the first time I've heard him say that, because normally what he says about the deal is, oh, it's going to be so easy to create this peace. It's not going to be easy.
My school bus, as you referred to it, is literally leaving now, and I have to run to get on the Prime Minister's plane and get to the airport. One thing I would love to point out is a lot of people, when Keir Starmer was adjusting big time Labour policy earlier this week and doing away with one of the central a central part of the creed of the Labour Party, overseas aid spending and shifting across to defence. Some people felt a little part of the Labour Party's soul died at that moment. Interestingly, I suspect, in fact, I know Morgan McSweeney, the Chief of Staff, who was in these meetings today, was not one of those, and he rather thinks that moment, that rather Trumpian moment, as some people called it, worked rather well, and that maybe if Labour had come in clanging around the kitchen pans a bit more like Donald Trump did when he came into office, with moves like that, they would have connected more with the voters, given themselves more space to do things like winter fuel allowance, and generally had a better start to their time in power. That will be a very interesting rethink of Labour to watch.
Gary, I'm going to let you go. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
We are the left behind, Lindsey, you and me on the roof. But there's still more stuff to talk about. I just can't really get my head around that atmosphere in the White House, and just trying to imagine what happens tomorrow when Zelenskyy turns up.
Yeah,
because that's the real, there's so much at stake here. There's the minerals deal, there's security guarantees, and it's been amazingly wishy-washy, hasn't it?
It has, and I think that one should think, so, it seems that world leaders, we looked at Macron earlier this week, Starmer today, they have to tread a line. It's a line between flattery and standing up to Donald Trump. And I think it was interesting to watch the Prime Minister today and see how he did that. Yes, there was the flattery and there was the letter and the invitation and the cake.
Some
but he
spine
did
as
say,
well.
there was, when asked about Putin, he said, I think my views on Putin are clear. And he did say, he also, stuck up for Ukraine. He was clear that, that Russia was the aggressor and so on. So I think he tried to tread that line. It's interesting to see that at the moment, President Trump does seem to have sort of rode back a bit, being more accommodating of Zelenskyy. And then the, 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 as you know, and I've said before, I am your minerals and metals correspondent.
Yeah.
I can
you
talk
love that
about.
stuff,
I
don't you?
love it.
When did that start, by the way?
Oh, it started
on a lonely night in winter, many years ago.
It started in Inner Mongolia in 2009 when I first.
I've got nothing to counter with that. Yeah,
when
fantastic.
I first looked at rare metals, because the whole point is that it is China who controls the processing of rare metals, and this is one of the things that's very interesting. So President Trump started this whole thing about the minerals and metals deal with Ukraine. The idea that, basically we're going to extract everything and we're going to get all the profit. But the deal as it stands at the moment, I read the draft yesterday, is not like that. It's actually about reconstruction of Ukraine. It doesn't look too bad for Ukraine at all. And also, it's not at all clear when these minerals and metals could actually, reap a profit. It takes a long time to dig a mine. It's very complicated. It takes a lot of investment. Where is that money going to come from? And so, if they sign it tomorrow, and it looks like they will sign it, it's not clear that that is going to do what President Trump wants, which is get America a lot of money from Ukraine in the short term.
But are we missing a trick here, as we sometimes do?
Yes.
That actually Donald Trump, by putting out a kind of ridiculous and maximalist position at the start of the conversation, I want $500 billion US dollars as back payment for the weapons and the help that we gave you. And now he's, that number's moved down to, I think, 350. It's still a lot of money. But is that what he does? He comes out with something that is utterly shocking.
Yes.
Everyone is running around like headless chickens, and then suddenly a week later, everyone settles on a landing strip which has something slightly more reasonable.
What, so you're saying it's like the bazaar in Marrakesh?
Yeah. Or he would say it's the art of the deal. Okay.
He would say that. Look, some of the things that Donald Trump says, he repeats himself a lot, and a lot of those things are not true. So he says that America has provided $350 billion worth of, aid to Ukraine, which is not true. It's between 100 and 150
He
billion.
also said the Europeans have provided a lot less, which is also
not true, because America is the biggest single donor, but the Europeans have provided about the same. And then the other thing is that he always says, that the Europeans just do loans and we do grants. That's not true. Both do loans and grants.
Right.
But yes, there is obviously, he is moving backwards and forwards on this. But I think that the other issue which you have to be aware of is that today an American delegation met a Russian delegation in Istanbul to improve relations, and Putin will play hardball, because one thing Putin isn't is mercurial.
Right.
And another thing Putin isn't is a waverer and a man who decides what he's going to say depending on the last thing he heard.
Right.
And in the end, this does come down to Putin and what Putin decides to do, and he will strike a very hard deal, if any deal at all.
Because he can carry on the war. He's got a war economy. He doesn't care how many thousands more Russian troops are killed in the process. And the ball is very much in his court. And Donald Trump, what does Donald Trump want from all this? The Nobel Peace Prize.
But also,
because Obama got one and he hasn't had one yet.
Yes.
And I think that's important. So his vanity is out there. And for Putin, it's about his mission to say, basically subjugate Ukraine.
Let's go back to 2017. And do you remember the big, beautiful deal that there was going to be with Kim Jong-un of North Korea?
What happened to that?
Well, it was a photo op and then nothing more. And so, Donald Trump doesn't always follow through. And I think that Vladimir Putin does always follow through. He knows exactly what he wants. And what he wants is not just Ukrainian territory. He wants to control Ukraine. He wants to control the Ukrainian government. And that's why he fed all this stuff into President Trump's ear about how Ukraine hadn't had elections and all of this stuff. And one of the issues which certainly Ursula von der Leyen was saying earlier this week was that, if Donald Trump does do a deal which basically allows President Putin to keep control of a lot of Ukraine and to maybe come back from more, to control the government and so on, then that is a sign to any autocrat or any leader. For example, President Xi Jinping of China, who certainly has his eyes on Taiwan.
We're going to wrap it up, Lindsey, but I just want you to look at this extraordinary scene. The White House looking very white today because of the black clouds, the promise of rain. The guy was only inaugurated, 5.5 weeks ago or so?
Yeah.
It seems like, the old Lenin statement.
Yes.
There are decades when nothing happens and there are weeks when decades happen. It feels like that still, doesn't it?
It does. And remember one other important thing? The bust of Winston Churchill has been moved back to the Oval Office. Did Winston Churchill have elections during the war?
He did not.
He did not. And that is what President Putin has told President Trump that Zelenskyy has to do. Winston Churchill wins, maybe.
Well, Lindsey, thank you very much. And of course to Gary Gibbon, who's hurtling in some motorcade to Andrews Air Force Base to get back on a plane with the Prime Minister and fly overnight to London. Thanks to both of you for this special edition of the Forecast from Washington, D.C. I hope you enjoyed it.